Welcome to the Worldwise Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to building a truly borderless life. From entrepreneurship, investment migration, tax optimization, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Lewis, welcome to the Worldwise Wealth Podcast. I am very much so looking forward to diving in today. Before doing so, please share a little bit more with myself, with the audience about you, your story, your background, and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm Louis O'Connor, the founder of Strategic Metals. At the moment, I'm in Tipperary in Ireland, originally from Dublin, but our main headquarters is in Central Europe, in Frankfurt, in Germany. I'll come back to that more in a minute. But so I lived in Germany for 10 years. So I left Ireland in my early 20s and had a great time living in Central Europe because Ireland, even though we're in Europe, we're an island. Even though we're a big island, we're still an island. So yeah, living in Central Europe was a whole different experience. And then I went traveling. I continued to travel. I ended up in Central America. So I was in Panama for 4 years, and sort of fell in love with Central America, Latin America. And then I did come back to Europe for 6 years, but I'd met my wife who's from Mexico, and we went back to Panama. So my two daughters were born in Panama, but now we're in Ireland and they're finishing school, and I came back specifically to be a partner in this business about 5 years ago.
Okay, awesome. I love that story. We do a lot of work in Central South America, so love hearing that you spent some time in Panama. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved into the precious metal industry.
So actually, I was in I was in Panama, but I met somebody from North America and the US who was going to this sort of investment conference in Las Vegas called the Freedom Fest. Been going for a long time, and it's sort of a little bit, I suppose you might say libertarian. I mean, I'm not political one way or the other, but that's the label they put on it, libertarian, progressive. And, I don't get into windy arguments about that stuff, but I'm always interested, I definitely have a curiosity about, what's coming, maybe what's around the corner that that we haven't seen yet that's coming like that. I think actually that came from when I first left home, I went to Heidelberg, Germany, and it was to this day, like one of the greatest experiences to me is when you go somewhere you've never been before and you just go for a walk or a wander, and, you're walking the streets of an unknown place, and you sort of just, your senses are sort of more alive, and you're very much in the moment because you're in a completely new place. And so, I've had, where we do offer precious metals, but actually, more, it'd be more sort of, it'd probably be more proper to say that our focus is on strategic metals. And what I mean by strategic metals are the metals that are critical today to all nations' economic prosperity, increasingly military capabilities. Rare earth metals, you probably in the last sort of month, 2, 3 months, I think nearly every head of state from President Trump to Canadian Prime Minister to Macron, and everybody's talking about rare earths and if they're in Ukraine and if they're in Greenland. So we're on the industry side of the business. So to try and give you an idea, like on your smartphone, there's 12 or 13 technology metals in there. There's 12 or 13 computer chips in there. So these are the metals that we focus on, but I suppose the same neodymium that's in the magnet in the tiny little speaker in your phone is needed in a magnet for electric cars, for wind turbines, for solar, and so on and so forth. So they're I suppose you could call them the industry side of the business.
We recently had somebody on the podcast about a month ago, and he really focused on metals in terms of silver and gold and what the markets are looking like now. I know that's quite interesting, especially with silver. So it's interesting to hear that you offer a different set of metals. Who is your typical customer base for this? Like, who are buying and holding these, and what is the value in holding these or using them?
Sure. Sure. Well, the first thing I should tell you or explain to your audience is there's three facets to our business. And the first thing is our core business. And this is what we won't be talking about, but it's important people know this is who we are before, so they understand how we can have this other offer to private investors. So our core business is there's about 45, 50 people in the office in Frankfurt, and we're buying metals from producers, mostly in China, sometimes in Africa. But China sort of has a bit of a monopoly on this industry, and that's why they're making the news a lot. Back today, there's talks in London between the US administration and the Chinese to sort of China is restricting some of these exports to the US, and factories could close down and stuff like that. So they're very, very important. But our core business is since 1999, that's what we do. We buy these metals and we sell them. We've got more than 4,000 clients in 74 different countries that buy these metals. So manufacturers, anything, people who make thermometers to cars, to cars, et cetera, et cetera. So I tell you that, Nicole, because if we weren't embedded in the industry for the last 25 years, it wouldn't be safe or moral or right to even try to offer these metals to private investors. So the side of the business that I work on is we have a storage facility as well, but I work with a private investor. So we invite private investors to own and participate in the supply chain, which they wouldn't normally be able to do, because of the access. And again, if like, for example, if I was just a guy or, somebody in Ireland or anywhere in the world and this was a sales and marketing idea, there'd be red flags everywhere. I mean, you know, the only end buyer, for example, for these metals might be the US Department of Defense, and they might be going into an F-35 fighter jet. So if I was to come on here and say, oh yeah, we're going to buy them from China and then we'll sell them, unless you're in the industry, it's not safe. And it's just a bad idea, actually. So I'm just telling you what the core business is first, but the offer that we would talk about is what you guys in the Americas might call our side hustle or our side business. And that is we invite private investors to safely participate in the supply chain. And it's just like gold and silver, as you mentioned, precious metals. It's the same paradigm. The private investor can buy them, physically own them, store them in the vault in Frankfurt. And, you know, talking about like gains, historically, they're outperforming precious metals. They're outperforming most of the sort of major indexes. There's a very good reason for that. And that is because the metals we're talking about don't occur naturally in the Earth's crust. So they're always a byproduct of another raw material. I'll use one example. Gallium is a byproduct of aluminum mining. Another one, hafnium, is a byproduct of zirconium. So for every 50 tons of zirconium, we get 1 ton of hafnium. Now, hafnium is a super alloy in jet engines and nuclear in rods and nuclear reactors, and also space technology, rocket engines. So it cannot be substituted, but it's only available in limited amounts. And China pretty much produces most of these raw materials. So you have this sort of scarcity driven price increases. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, they are profitable to own if you're aligned with our sort of investment strategy.
And are you working mostly with, I'm curious for my own curiosity, are they private investors? Are they corporate clients? Or is it typically private investors who are storing them in a vault and keeping them simply for the games?
Good question. Yeah. So mostly at this point in time, private investors. These metals have been sort of largely ignored or off the radar of sort of institutional money up until now. And the reason is they sort of they have a small economic visibility. Like within the industry, we sort of call them the spice metals, which is a good analogy for food, like when you add a bit of spice. So like in a smartphone, for example, you can swipe your phone because of indium, but indium might only be 0.02% makeup of that phone. So it's a very, very small amount. Yet you cannot swipe without indium. So they don't have that much of an economic visibility. The market cap is, I mean, it's 15 to 20 billion. It's a huge industry, but in compared to gold, which is a 15, 17 trillion dollar market cap. So they're off the radar of institutional money until now. I don't think that will remain that way forever. Uh, and mainly as well, because as we've discussed, like that, like for example, Goldman Sachs wouldn't invest in them probably for the same reason they wouldn't invest in minted coins or I don't know, classic watches or something like that. So they're not, like gold, you can get in and out of that market quite easily. With these raw materials, you've got to make sure that they're industry grade, the type, what does BMW buy, what purity levels, what does the US department, you need to know all that stuff. And secondly, you need to have access to the end buyer, which we do. So that's why institutional money up till now has sort of, they're off the radar. But I do think that will change because I would say in the last 90 days, it's funny we're talking now, but I'm in this industry a good while. But in the last 90 days, I've heard more heads of state talk about rare earths than I have in the last 10 years. So they are um, beginning to sort of come in more and more into the mainstream. And I'll tell you why it is, Nicole. Actually, it brings up a good point. The Ursula, the head of the European Union, the president of the European Union, recently said that rare earths are fast becoming more important than oil and gas. So they are the raw materials that are needed in this energy transition. AI, for example, runs on data, but relies on rare earths for magnets, sensors, cooling systems, power, these data centers. So they are they're I suppose you could say they're the upstream raw materials that become trillions of dollars in downstream GDP. And as we pivot from sort of oil to metals, these particular metals are sort of the front line in geopolitical decisions. I mean, it's actually what I'm saying is proven by the fact that the U.S. administration deems them so important they would use them as leverage to maybe get involved in between Ukraine and the U.S. Make no mistake when they're talking about Greenland, it's the resources that they're after. So they're very, very important. But we're only, again, it's funny. Like Indium, we touch it hundreds of times a day, but nobody ever thinks, oh, I wonder what that is. How does it do that? And can I own it? But I think that will change fairly soon.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that because I was going to ask, why are government, more institutional investors not involved in this at the degree that it seems like they would potentially be thinking about. So if somebody is looking to get into, to say, rare earths, is the only way right now to buy and hold them and store them somewhere? Can you invest in them? Index funds? What does that look like?
So again, excellent question. So at the moment, like the market for rare earths and technology is purely supply and demand driven. So it's not manipulated or correlated in any way to the stock market. Um, as I said, there's a lot of interest in them at the moment. People can invest in a mine if that's, if, that's can be a risky endeavor, in terms of a maiden discovery to feasibility studies to actually, I think the average in time in the US to, from discovery to being in a product is about 29 years. So that's a real long-term sort of a thing. But no, at the moment, there's, we're sort of creating the first marketplace where private investors can physically own them. And the only reason we can do that, as I said, is we're 25 years in the industry as an industry supplier. But I would imagine we'll be hearing more and more about them. Somebody else, we're Europe based. Our clients are, mostly in the US, outside of Europe, most of our clients are North American. We've clients in Australia and, all Middle East and stuff as well. But there's a huge interest from the US.
I'm curious. I was having a similar conversation with someone on the podcast the other day. Do you think there's a reason why, even though you're based in Europe, a lot of your market is US and not Europeans? Is it simply the marketing that you're doing, or do you think there's another reason?
Well, I think in the US, the US is probably more innovative in many ways. And I think investors are a bit more curious. and I don't want to say more willing to take a risk, but they're more willing to take a look at I say North Americans might be more curious about what's coming down the line. I think they always I found Americans to be very curious. They're always very curious. They want to know. They're willing to do a bit of digging, and whereas Europeans maybe are, don't- not hesitant sometimes if it's new, like that sort of dismiss it before they investigate it, whereas Americans will investigate it before they dismiss it is probably a better. And when you look into this, it makes sense. It's real. I mean, they're profitable. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sitting here, talking to you 25. Yeah, but we've only been offering them to private investors since about 2012, and at the beginning, it was like we've never done any direct marketing to private investors, and we never will because it's off brand. We're a tier one supplier on the industry side to many, many blue chip companies. So it's sort of word of mouth. It's grown organically. We're happy enough with that. But, we recently had some US Navy veterans over visiting the vault and checking things out. And not long before that with somebody from Hawaii, but just who's based there. So there's a lot of interest coming. I think probably because they've been in the news as well a lot, that there's a scarcity of them. So, discerning investors in the US, their ears are going, their ears are ringing. And as I said, I love working with North Americans because they're curious. For me, I mean, I like meeting people as well. I love to do business, but to be honest, if I meet somebody, it's just great that we met. And I'm just happy if somebody gives me the time and allows us to just, when I see somebody take a dive and learn everything they need to know, I'm happy. If they come on board, great. If not, it was still absolutely worthwhile, and that's what I like. Most of my clients are from the US, and it's because they're curious. Well, and I love talking anyway. I'm Irish.
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of came to the same conclusion, the discussion we were having on the podcast, with a lot of our client being US Canadian and a lot of his client being European. And so us having conversations being in adjacent industries was very interesting to see the differences between clients. Um, okay, so let's talk about, you mentioned Vault. Let's talk about storage and your European based. A lot of your clients are North American based. What does that look like to actually hold these rare earths?
Okay, so the storage facility in Frankfurt, it's a sister. When I say we, I'm talking about, I suppose, three different legal entities, three different facets to the industry. So we have the industry supplier where we buy and sell. And in that side of the business, our clients are global. So we've clients, we sell to manufacturers in Germany, in America, in Japan, wherever they might be. So there's no bias, if you will, on the demand and that realm. And then I work just with private investors. So I don't work with manufacturers. We have somebody else that do that. But the storage facility, quite interesting actually. It was a vault bunker in World War II. So it's got two levels below ground, and we built this third level above with an office and, 2.5 meter walls and doors. And so that is our logistics and distribution platform. And it's a duty free zone. So it's just like, if you were storing in Switzerland or Singapore. So the inventory that's there, some of it is our inventory that we own. Some of it is some of our manufacturing clients who buy and store some as well, and then private investors. And if somebody stores there, um, when they buy, there's no VAT or duty because it's a duty-free facility. Um, but in the facility, I wouldn't say there's any, I couldn't say exactly, but we store for clients from everywhere, and, I've had quite a few clients as well in the US who haven't purchased because our facility is in Germany, and I understand that as well. That's completely, even sure I'm in Ireland and I have some clients in Ireland and they won't buy because it's in Germany, which is, not too far away and it's within the EU. So it is a bit of a niche product. There is a particular mindset that will see it and get it. But again, I'm just, I had a gentleman one time in the US who said, and it's funny, it was right. We were talking And then as we were maybe close to doing some business, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine borders Poland, and Poland borders Germany. So he said, no, he said, Louis, I like, if I, I like to keep my metals close to home, he said. So I think maybe they were buried out in the backyard or something, but that was a fair point. And, I mean, I wouldn't, I'd never argue or challenge anybody's beliefs anyway. I'm just happy. I'm very happy when somebody just takes the time to explore it, investigate it, find out everything they need to know, and make an informed decision.
Yeah, I love that. I love just sharing information and people making decisions based off of what is best for them and their lifestyle. So let's talk about the trajectory. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, but what do you see in terms of trajectory for rare earths for the next few years, 5 years, 10 years? What does that look
Okay, this now. This is where I get excited because what we're talking about the path of progress, right? And the way I always try to explain it is, if you want to know what's happening in the next 5 years, look at the last five first, right? So I don't think anybody would argue, Nicole, that demand for these raw materials is going to continue to increase. Electric cars, wind, solar, all modern technology, AI, robotics, aviation, nuclear energy, military defense metals, you name it. So, I mean, we live in the technology age, and these are the technology metals. So not only do they have an intrinsic value, um, they are becoming more and more intrinsic to how I had a guy in the US recently say to me as well, he's part of, a rare earth thing over there. He said, Louis, everything we eat was probably grown, and everything we touch probably came from a mine, So if we didn't have these raw materials, we'd be sitting here practically, well, we wouldn't be sitting here because we wouldn't have any technology, but I'd be in a cave more or less, or a tree, or, you know what I mean? I'm just, they are intrinsic to how we live. And what's interesting about these particular rare earths is, as I mentioned earlier, they don't occur naturally. So I'll give you some examples. In Terbium is needed um, semiconductors, so computer chips, and already people within the industry would say that we're in a technology sort of a trade war with China, and then if you some people are calling it Cold War 2.0, and the difference being it's not an arms race, it's a semiconductor race. Everything is now about precision and technology. I'll just give you an example. Terbium, one of the metals we sell, when we went into lockdown and now the whole world was going to work from home, there was a surge in demand for, laptops and home computers and all technology you'd need. So Terbium went up 500% in 3 years, because it's a byproduct of a norm raw material, meaning when demand increases, there's an inflexibility or an inelasticity to supply. That's how our investors make their gains, is when there's what we call a scarcity driven price increase. When we came out of COVID and terbium corrected over a year or two, the price came down, but hafnium went up 250% in 18 months. And the reason for that was Boeing and Airbus start to put in orders for planes again when we came out, and it's a super alloy in jet engines. And then most recently, just in the last 6 weeks, on April the 4th, China announced restrictions on 7 rare earths. 2 of them we offer to private investors, and these raw materials haven't left China in the last 6 weeks, so the prices have gone up 40% or 50%. So these type of supply bottlenecks will continue. In fact, and like it's estimated that China will have an unrivaled dominance in this industry until probably the 2040s, because it's not just about having, it's about the technology behind them as well. For example, um, they have to be extracted, they have to be separated, they have to be sort of remetallized to these very high purity levels. And Europe and the US, we sort of allowed China, when globalization was the thing, we just thought, okay, well, China will do it inexpensively and we'll just buy them. Well, I think what happened was China understood, maybe before everyone else, how important they would be in the 21st century. They're the backbone of manufacturing in this 24th century. So it'll be another 10, 15 years before, because despite the name, Nicole, they're not all that rare. Some of them, like for example, there's 500,000, 500,000 abandoned coal mines in the US that have mine tailing. And these raw materials are in those tailings. And there are people in the US looking at how can we get them. But what they don't have at the moment in the US or Europe is the human or the engineering expertise or the human capital. There's one producing facility in the US, which is Mountain Pass in California, but they sell most of their ores to China to be processed because the engineering expertise doesn't exist. Now, having said that, Mountain Pass will become a very big player. They're going to. It may have already opened a facility in Texas where they'll move further up the value chain like China. But even still, I'd say that might only represent 1% of global supply. So it's still a long way to go. And in the meantime, investors can profit. And that's why there's a benefit for us when we invite private investors. The benefit to us is we have inventory, and we know the most important thing in 2027, 2030 and beyond will be to have an inventory and to have fair prices. So that's the benefit to us. The benefit to our clients are if they're aligned with our strategy, and the strategy is it's a 3 or 5 year play, it's not crypto. You can get sort of sudden gains like crypto, but we don't really want, what we call day traders. We want people who are aligned with the strategy. I mean, the reason I can back that up or say that with certainty, Nicole, is we don't have 10 different offers. We don't also do crypto. We don't do agriculture. And our business is metals, and we know that business. And we say in a very frank, sincere way to people, like, please don't do this unless you're aligned with our strategy. You know what I mean? You might make good money in 6 months, but please don't come on board unless you're in it for 3 to 5 years, and just trust the process.
Yeah, I like that message. And I think that's very fair, especially when you're getting into a new market, but any investment market, you ideally want to hold long term and realize those gains at least 5 years down the line. So we've touched on a lot today. Um, is there anything else that you want to add to this discussion? Anything about I saw on your website there is minimums, maybe what a typical order would look like, or just anything in general that we've left out of this?
Yeah, I think, as I said, people in general will be hearing more about these raw materials, and what we encourage people to do, and genuinely, I mean, our business is very strong on the industry side, so we don't want uncomfortable situations with any private investor. So, we say to people, please get into that information gathering, stay there for a while, really learn what this is, and start small. The minimum investment is only $10,000. Start small with, a level you're comfortable with, and build a position over time as you see the gains come in and you learn more about the metals. Once somebody signs up to our website, we have a newsletter goes out weekly, which is just not salesy at all, purely educational and informative. And you know yourself as well, Nicole, probably, I know the business you're in and you're constantly discovering new things for people. So when you go looking for something, when you go down the path sort of always opens up for you, doesn't it? So I think when people, they want to learn a bit about what we do, once you go down, all of a sudden you start hearing on the news everywhere, rare earths, or, it's sort of funny when you start to give something some attention. So yeah, we welcome anybody to sort of join us and get into that discovery stage. And then, if they like it and get comfortable, people are always welcome. It's a long trek, but they're welcome to come and visit us in Frankfurt and see the office and the vault. And the one thing I'll say before I finish, and I hate to give a mixed message because it confuses people, but we're open to having sales partners in Latin America, in North America. As I said, we're mostly in Europe, but we have a lot of clients outside of Europe. So we're now, as I said, we had some people over, ex-military guys who are probably maybe coming on board. So we're open to, partners, people who are in precious metals, for example, might want to add rare earths to their portfolio, and they can offer through us. They can use our platform as a because we guarantee the purity of the metals, and we offer the liquidation is also in place as well, so people don't have to worry about what am I going to do with these metals,
That was actually going to be my last question. I was just thinking as you were speaking, what does selling look like? Who are you selling to?
Okay, so our the storage facility in Frankfurt is our logistics and distribution platform. So when you buy from us, we strongly recommend, even though you physically own the asset, that you store it there. So you have your invoice that you own it and you have a safekeeping receipt. But the chain of custody is very important to these metals. So like Siemens or BMW or Ford Motor Company or Apple, they will not take delivery of these raw materials unless they're still in the original packaging from the producer, and what we call the chain of custody is completely intact, meaning that they never left the original packaging, and we know where they were. So if somebody ships them to the US, they're out of the chain of custody and they become a lot less valuable. So again, that's part of the investment strategy. We say, look, only purchase them if you're willing to keep them in the chain of custody, because you're going to lose so much money if you don't. So when they're in our facility, it means our clients have access to our 4,000 clients in 70 different countries when they're ready to sell. So if somebody comes to me on a Monday and they want to sell, we'll sell them that week for them. There's a bid ask spread, there's a commission, of course, but it's pretty normal standard stuff. I'm happy to discuss with people, but the liquidation is there. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Good to know. That's an important piece of the puzzle, that you ideally are keeping it in your storage facility and then just holding up.
Yeah, that's huge. No, you're right. And, again, that's where the curiosity and an investigative mind comes in. I mean, I'm glad you asked it, because I'm sure there's some people who go, oh, well, what's the point in me buying gallium? What am I going to do with it? But, if you thoroughly investigate, the strategy is we are an industry supplier. So we have a practice of buying, all we do is buy and sell metals. We'll sell them to you and we'll also buy them back from you.
Yeah. Is there any other important questions like that we're missing from this conversation, that when you have conversations with investors come up often?
No, because that's really it. It's the entry, the storage, and the exit. Those are three fundamentals that if they were not in place, it wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great that you have that entire supply chain figured out on your end. So it's just a one and done purchase down the line for your customers. So drop the website again. It will be linked below, but drop the website so everyone knows where to find you.
Great. Okay. So it's www.strategicmetalsinvest.com. And also my email, if somebody, wants to contact me, just mention the show, the podcast. It's Louis, Louis, at strategicmetalsinvest.com, and we'll take good care of them.
You've just listened to the Worldwise Wealth podcast. Visit our links in the show notes below or at worldwisecapital.com to learn more about how we can assist in your borderless diversification journey. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.